Visit us at Eduvvo. Thank you for calling Eduvvo.
In this video, we'll go over the common numeric and textual values that CSS properties can accept. Let's get started. So here we have a simple HTML page containing a div and a paragraph element nested inside. It's linked to a style sheet named style.css, and this is where we'll be creating our new CSS rules. I've already added a few properties to the body and div elements just to set up our page. So most CSS properties have several predefined values defined that can be used. Many of them are fairly self-explanatory, specifying the browser to, for example, make a font weight bold, align text to center, or set a text decoration to underline. The three important values we'll go over are auto, inherit, and initial. The value auto is the default value for certain properties like width, height, z-index, and a few others. Auto means that the browser automatically calculates those values. So, for example, if we add a margin property to our div element on the page and use the value auto, we're allowing the browser to automatically calculate the margins. Because the div is a block element that has a specified width of 700 pixels, the left and right margins will be set to equal. When we refresh the page, notice how this centers our div element in the available space of the page. A value of inherit can be used on any property to explicitly specify that the value of the property should be the same as its parent element. For example, anchor elements by default do not inherit color values unless specified. Even if we set the paragraph's color value to red, the color of the link remains its default color value. But if we define a color value of inherent for the anchor element, we'll refresh and notice how the link turns red because now it's inheriting the color value of its parent element, which is the paragraph. Generally, you shouldn't style your links the same color as the paragraph text, but for this example, I'm only doing it to demonstrate how inherent works. For a list of all the properties that accept the inherent value, take a look at the w3.org's property table. The initial value is a value that is designated as the property's initial value. So it goes back to the initial value the element would have if no styles were applied. For example, the value of the color property is the color black. So nested inside of the paragraph, we have a strong element containing the first sentence, which has the color red inherited from the paragraph's value. We'll create a new rule for the strong element, and we'll specify a color value of initial. When we refresh, notice how the strong element reverts back to its initial color value of black, and the parent value no longer applies. Now, Chrome and Safari support initial without vendor prefixes. However, Firefox, for now, needs the mods vendor prefix. Unfortunately, IE does not have support yet for initial. Next, we'll cover quoted strings. So let's create a new rule with the after pseudo element where we'll use the content property to generate content with a string. Strings are a sequence of characters enclosed by single or double quotes. For this example, we'll stick with double quotes and we'll include some text inside. We'll also increase the font size and change the color just to differentiate the text from the regular text on the page. And here you see our generated content. Now, a double quoted string cannot contain double quotes unless they're escaped using a backslash. So if we need to render double quotes in our content, we'll need to insert a backslash before each quotation mark. When we refresh the page, there we see the quotes rendered in the text. If we want to use the backslash character as part of the string, we'll also need to precede it with a backslash to escape it. Now we see the backslash rendered in the text. Remember that these same conventions also apply when using single quoted strings. Properties can also accept a URL reference as a value. So if we're defining a background image in an element, the URL value uses a functional notation to tell the browser where to find the image. The functional notation used to specify a URL value is URL and a set of parentheses. The URL specified can optionally be enclosed with either single or double quotes, and can also contain white space before or after the optionally quoted URL. So go ahead and specify the image we want to display, which is bg.jpg. And when we refresh the page, we can see the background image we applied to our div using the URL data type. We've already been using numeric data types in our values, but we haven't formally specified exactly what types are accepted. Numeric value types can be integers or real numbers. An integer consists of one or more of the digits 0 to 9, and a real number can either be an integer or one that contains a decimal point, and both can be preceded by a negative sign to indicate a negative number. Negative values essentially work in the reverse way that positive values work. So, for example, if I add a margin top property to our div rule and apply a value of negative 8m, when we refresh, we see the div move 8m, or about 154 pixels up from its original position. Margins are one of the few properties that can accept a negative value. Other properties include background position, text indent, and the position properties for top, right, bottom, and left. We can also use decimals in our number values. For example, if we change it to 15.58, we'll refresh, and now we see how the decimal value affects our page. Finally, percentages consist of a number immediately followed by a percentage sign. They're always computed relative to another value, usually a length unit. Common properties that use percentages are width, margin, padding, and font size. If we define a width of 50% to our paragraph element, when we refresh, we see that the paragraph's width is now 50% of the width of its parent div, set to 700 pixels. If we increase the width of the div to, say, 800 pixels, the paragraph's width still scales in relation to the new width. When we use percentages for font sizes, the size of the font will be related to the font size of its parent element. So here, the parent div element's font size is inherited from the body at 1.2m, or 19 pixels. So if we apply a font size to the paragraph element of 75%, the paragraph's font size decreases to 75% of the body font size, equivalent to 14 pixels. So that'll do it for numeric and textual data types.
We'll be using most of these data types throughout our videos, so it's important to understand how they work. In the next video, we'll explore the many ways that color can be represented with CSS color values.